I'm Dr. Kanwal Khalid. We all know from the existing knowledge that the oldest civilizations the world has ever seen, they were primarily four, and that was Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and of course Indus Valley civilization. And we have done lots of excavations, and lots of information has come from all these sites, and we know a lot about the kind of artifacts and the kind of information that has been revealed during those excavations. During all these times of antiquity, there is no mention of Europe. And if we look back history beyond 16th century, we realize that much of the inventions and much of the technology that was explored at that time period was associated to Asia-based civilizations, or from some of it was associated to Africa. Now, and then from 17th century onwards, there is a big boom of inventions and scientific discoveries in Europe. That really intrigued me. Why we do not come across so much scientific discoveries and informations prior to that period, and especially when we come up to 18th and specifically in the 19th century, there was no end to it, and we have number of new electronic and so many other gadgets that were being invented at that time period. So, to understand that, I'm trying to go back in the history and see what happened before that. We all know that during the Mesopotamian period, writing was invented, and cuneiform was the form of writing that was being used at that time period. Cuneiform is a writing that had wedge at the end, and it was written with an instrument that we call stylus. And then again, if we look at the Egypt, in Egypt, they had, by the way, these cuneiform writings were done on the clay tablets. That's something very important, that the clay tablets were used and the wet clay tablets were literally engraved with the cuneiform writing style. Then we go into Egyptian civilization, and there we come across a plant of papyrus that gave a bark of a plant that was used for writing and doing other kind of documentation, and that was extremely popular at that time period. And from there, if we move to the other region, China had their way of expression, and in Indus Valley civilization, we again come up with lots of artifacts that have writing on it, but unfortunately, we have not been able to decipher it. So we do not know what's written in the script of Indus Valley civilization. But the rest of the scripts have been deciphered and understood, especially cuneiform and hieroglyphs. They have been deciphered, and we know what is written in those documents and all that, those different objects that we have found with writing on it. Now, coming back to the point of excavation, much of the European excavation started happening from 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. During those excavations, the archaeologists were coming up with lots of artifacts, and but there was another perspective associated to these excavation expeditions, that they were an expensive endeavor, and it was sponsored by the people who were extremely wealthy. We all know that people with money, they never invest on something from which they will not get the profit. And the same was the case here. Whoever invested for the archaeological excavations, they were basically looking for treasures. And these archaeologists in the 18th and 19th centuries, they were also labeled as treasure hunters. And many of them were not disappointed, because during those excavations, they were definitely coming across gold and gems and jewels, because these were being buried underground, and they were taking them out and they were using them as their, as a reward for all those who were investing in this adventure and who were part of this adventure physically. So, this was the basic purpose of archaeological excavations, to find the gold and the treasures buried underground. Later on, these the artifacts that were being excavated, they also got got important, and they were highly priced by the museums and different art collectors. So that had another dimension, but that dimension of wealth came much later in time. They were not initially appreciated so much that we all know how the mummies of the Egypt were literally used to fire the engines or the train engines that were traveling from Egypt and to the outer countries. This was the significance that or the importance given to these artifacts. But later on, yes, they were given lots of importance, and these artifacts and these findings became very expensive, and they were bought by the public. So, if you look at an ancient archaeological excavation, especially the European one from 18th and 19th century, uh, it was purely business, and it does not have much to do with the thirst of knowledge. Of course, later on, the researchers joined and they came up with lots of publications, but the primary purpose of these excavations was to get wealth and to get the treasures buried underground. During these excavations, another element that was being explored and that was being excavated, and these were the ancient libraries. These ancient libraries were found in almost every important excavational site, especially in Mesopotamia and Egypt. Now, question is that where did those libraries go? I'll come back to that question after some time. When I was doing my research on the ancient libraries, one thing was very prominent, that these were the libraries who belonged either to the temples. They were the temple libraries, then they were associated with the kings and they were kept in their palaces. And the third was the individuals who were holding those libraries. And these libraries had the documents associated to religion, histories, and they had literary works. But along with that, they have lots of scientific works also written in those documents. Now, let me tell you something, that the libraries found in Mesopotamia were based on the clay tablets who were put together in jars in the forms of books. And the libraries found in Egypt, they were based on papyrus documents which were kept in rolls again in jars in different places in ancient Egyptian civilization. Now, here is one library that I'll talk about today. That was the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal, and we come across more than 30,000 clay tablets that consisted of different documents and different, different text that was written on that. Now, this was found in Nineveh. Nineveh was once the capital of the mighty Assyrian Empire, and Ashurbanipal ruled from 669 to 631 BC. That was his time period. He was a great patron of arts and he was an extremely literary person. About this particular library, we come to know that the capital Nineveh, which was a grand city, once was consumed by fire. During that fire, if the documents were in the form of papyrus, they would have burnt. But since they were in the form of clay tablets, so they became harder by this fire, and they were more preserved now. That is why we come across these baked, harder clay tablets that they became very well preserved, and we come across and they could last like for thousands of years. This is exactly what happened. They were excavated in a series of digs, and from 1840s onwards, And there was this English explorer, and his name was Austin Henry Layard. And he started doing his excavation from 1850 onwards. And now, interestingly, these people, these archaeologists who were doing the excavations, interestingly, much of the time, they were not the ones directly associated with the digging. It was the local people who were doing the digging. And then they would inform their whoever was heading that expedition if they would find something. So this is exactly what happened. That Austin Henry's local foreman, who was a local man, and his name was Thomas Shishman, and he was the one who informed Austin that he has come across a huge repository of tablets. And then another of his Iraqi assistant, Holman Rassam, was the continued in excavations. And in 1852, he discovered a second palace, and in it another large collection of tablets were found. So these are very important findings that were being discovered by the locals, but the attribute is most of the time given to the European masters who were funding or who were supervising these excavations. Now, this particular library that we come across, which is of Ashurbanipal, it had lots of topics, and that also included the details about the court intrigues, secret intelligence reports, prayers, hymns, and rituals, religious rituals, step by step were explained. All these were written in those clay tablets. Interestingly, in he Ashurbanipal, the king, he kept some of the tablets that he used during his training, even when he was studying. So he kept those tablets in his library as if in a memory of his study times, or he found them so useful that he kept them. And most of the tablets had a royal stamp on it. These books had lots of information, and they had details of the court intrigues and the secret intelligence reports that were being given. And then there were religious rituals that were explained step by step. It has lots of hymns that were being recited in those days, and the prayers. And interestingly, some of these clay tablets, they had a medical treatment. They were associated to the medical, and they were medical handbooks kind of thing. In one particular uh, clay tablet, we come across a recipe of mental disorder that was written in there. The library was very famous in antiquity also, and there were historians who have been writing about it, even though it was burned and some part of it was destroyed. And some scholars say that even this became an inspiration for the later library of Alexandria that was again established in Egypt. So uh, uh, this was the significance of this particular library. Now, my question is that during all the excavation, this is one of the just few examples that we come across about these libraries. And again, within those libraries, if came across at least 30,000 books, and so where did the other books go? That's a big question mark. Now, these were the excavations that were made during 18th and 19th century, and parallel to these excavations were the European Industrial Revolution and an abundance of inventions. So, at one side, these were the excavations going on, and on the other side, these were the inventions that were happening in Europe. If you coincide the date, I find them going on parallel. Like cycle came in 1817, telephone and telegraph in 1876, electricity, the concept of electricity that we come across with Thales in 6th century BC, but first time it was used in UK in 1878. The car came in 1886. Now my question here is that the books that were being discovered in ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and in so many other regions, what did they contain? And most of the time, for an ordinary man and some for researchers even, we are told that these are the books that are based on the mythologies and the religion and long stories and tales and literature and all that. But we do get glimpse of some scientific books also, some medical books also, that tell us that these books based on clay tablets and papyrus, they were not just a mumbo jumbo of ancient civilization and their literature, but it was much more serious than that. It contained medical information, it contained scientific information, it contained mathematical information, so much so we come across some tablets that have music written in them. And some of the writers, they also believe that the European symphonies that were introduced at that time period, especially with the reference of Beethoven, that were already written in Mesopotamian clay tablets. This is what was going on. Another interesting fact that we come across is the invention of aeroplane that happened much later in 1903. But in many hieroglyphs of Egyptian civilization, we do have an image of a hieroglyphic image of a plane-like drawing, and then there were the drawings of they resemble the submarines, and the drawings that resemble the batteries, and there were so many things that we see, but they were on the walls of the monuments. My question here is about those ancient libraries. Where did they go? Who has been studying them? And we do know that these languages have been deciphered. So whatever has been written in those books, that has been implemented one way or the other. The point I'm trying to make here is not to discredit the European civilizations for their development and for their inventions. My point here is that if there was some kind of information or reference taken from the ancient civilizations, it should have been mentioned and it should have been made public, because there is an impression that has been given that we are the most literate and developed civilization in the world. That is not true. If Because if you look at the ancient civilizations, if they were as illiterate as they have been perceived, then how were they able to create monuments as big as the pyramids and the ziggurats? And then look at their medical science, that they have been able to preserve their bodies, which have been quite safe and secure even till date. These were the people who had their kind of knowledge, which was extremely important, and their knowledge and their information played a very important role in today's development. It's high time that we acknowledge their studies and their discoveries, and give them a tribute in this time and era.